Alan Clements Uncensored. Thank you for listening to my podcast. A few notes about the presentation. After years of scripted talks, many of them methodically outlined, some even memorized, at least in part, I decided to drop that style and simply speak spontaneously from my heart. So that's what I do. My talks are raw and improvisational. I make them up as I go along. In addition to my World Dharma talks, I also offer at times readings from my books, Instinct for Freedom, A Future to Believe in, The Voice of Hope, and Wisdom for the World. I also offer readings of my personal notes, sometimes guided meditations, dialogues from my World Dharma public forums, interviews from radio and television, and sections from my show, Spiritually Incorrect Meets Relationship Incorrect, The Great Reckoning, and the occasional conversation with someone I find interesting. I also want to express my deep gratitude to the people who have made donations to me, either a one-time or recurring donation, either on the support page of my website, alanclements.com, or pledged a monthly amount as little as $1, perhaps $3 or even $5 a month, through my Patreon site. If you're inspired to do so, you can support this podcast and my work by making a monthly pledge at Patreon. That's patreon.com, patreon.com/Alan Clements, and there you'll find my page. You can use a credit card or pay through PayPal, and your monthly pledge, that's what it takes, just a few minutes to set up, allows me not only to do my work, it allows me to create my art, use my voice, speak my Dharma, free of commercial consideration or advertisers. Thank you from my heart for taking the time to listen to my podcast, and thank you for your generous support. I hope you enjoy the presentation. So we're back from beloved Ubud, Bali, Indonesia, on planet Earth. Welcome back to those of you who are watching and listening online. We're talking throughout the storm, and now we're back, about how to maintain independent thinking, to be vigilant with the powers that be, both outside and inside, of the possibility of being conscripted into being someone other than who I want to be, indoctrination. How do we look for the signposts of propaganda? What is political propaganda? What is global propaganda? What is spiritual propaganda? What is psychological propaganda? How much do we believe versus how much do we discern? What's news, what's fake, what's faux, what's real, what's not being said. Noam Chomsky coined the term spiritual self-defense as the best expression of spirituality. What is the best expression of spirituality? To practice spiritual self-defense. How to maintain independent thinking, and that no one really knows. How to keep that both open-mindedness available at the same time. For me, I can't say for anyone else, stay as grounded as possible in timeless qualities of heart and mind and body. Metta, love, compassion, generosity, make them the stalwarts, the foundation of our presence. So how do I become more grounded in independent thinking? Deep, deep, deep inquiry. Elie Wiesel, you've heard me quote him, the Nobel laureate. There are no absolute answers, paraphrasing. There are absolute questions. Keep a questioning mind. Steer away from anyone with absolute answers. So Burma's revolution was about keeping alive the question. How well do we keep an active, curious mind and discerns and asks, is that true? And by what evidence is it true? Cross-reference. Do deep research, both externally and internally. doubt everything is a far better way to find freedom than to believe. Doubt. I am doubting today, sing it out. Praise the doubt. I will not be conscripted in the belief that it's the end of the world. Bring harmony to it. Make it your raison d'etre to own your mind. I've been fortunate, based on desire and good circumstance and fate, to be birthed spiritually primarily in America in the 60s, a very special birth, and also in the country of Burma, Myanmar today. Burma is a country where many of you may know George Orwell lived, the author of 1984. He was there for 3 years during the war. Many of you know also that the British occupied Burma for close to 135 years, 2 wars, the enslavement of the country. It was the pearl of the Orient, Kipling said. It was England's prize. A sophisticated culture, rich in resources and pearls and rubies and oil and teak and all kinds of fish and rice. They say that Rangoon, the capital before, was on par with Tokyo pre-war. And it's now one of the 5th world countries, perhaps in the index of wealth and poverty in the lower 6 countries on the planet, where the majority of people are agrarian, which is pretty interesting. You know better than me about what it means to touch the earth. But also poverty that's staggering. And civil disobedience to your own mind, knowing the qualities and the components of how to maintain a vigilant, not just a doubt, but an unwillingness to participate in what feels to be the ways in which society and internal tendencies are triggered to make you to believe something against your own best interest and the best interests of your community. So values and principles are something that we should make indelibly placed in our home, in our house, on our walls, on our paintings, to remind us of the importance of freedom. Václav Havel from the Czech Republic once made a comment in one of his books that even after the dictatorship and the totalitarian fell, people were so programmed to believe in the denigration of society and the fear of society and the fear of retribution that they walked with backs hunched over. Their minds were unreceptive to the creative possibilities. They lived in the dark recesses of their own psyche, anticipating the reoccurrence of totalitarian rule, the habit of domination. So I don't know whether or not we fit into that when we do our yoga. Do you feel this contrivance? Do you feel the inauthenticity? Do you feel the burden, the anticipation? Or do we feel the revolutionary edge there confronting the challenges of status quo? I refuse to participate in anything other than the independence and the sovereignty of my own heart and mind in respect to the values of my family and community. Harmony, goodness, beauty, and truth, timeless qualities. Embed them in our heart, make poetry, make music, make love to them. Put them on the wall. If I had a wall right now that was called my home, and I still have it, I take notes and put them everywhere. I remind myself to forget so that I can read it and see it and believe it and emote it. And just as I love doing these retreats, it's as much for you as it is for me. I get to hear myself through my ear and my eye and interrelate, Ubuntu. Breathe it, live it, talk it, interrelate, do all that we can. You know all this. We all know all this. But this isn't a time to be marginal, to be vigilant. A closing story, moving on to the next topic, and maybe we can interrelate this issue of propaganda, civil disobedience, social disobedience, spiritual disobedience, the questioning of martial law, all kinds of ways in which we're using the word lockdown. I'm becoming familiar with lockdown in my best interest. Okay, here are the chains on my hands. I'm mocking the compassion of the world. You idiot, former Buddhist monk, drunk in your own arrogance to say this. Persecuted, Gandhi, for nonviolence. Aung San Suu Kyi vilified around the world for being a woman who championed feminine-inspired nonviolent revolution to toxic, militant patriarchy, and the whole world believes that she's a demon. How did that happen? Oh, Alan, really? Huh? I've lost 90% of my donor base based on my affiliation with her. I don't throw people under the bus easily, I'll tell you that. Don't throw yourself under the bus. So being vigilant. My friend, I just saw him recently, U Win Tin, who was Aung San Suu Kyi's closest colleague and advisor and best friend, and still is in many ways, although he's semi-retired and prolific writer. He was a former military officer in Burma. I met him when I met her. He was her chief advisor and also one of the key people for her access to the media, and I was one of those people. So I met with him on a regular basis, as I met with her for those 6 months in Rangoon in her house, where we discussed revolution and nonviolence, and it came out as a book, The Voice of Hope. But he became one of my best friends. He had just been released from 6 years. I just saw him recently. He's about 79 years old. We were talking, and he spent 20 years and 9 months in prison for his beliefs. You can't get him to judge a person, and although he's been vilified and judged. He's got this durable sense of satirical humor. Humor, I find, and satire are the best ways to confront the possibility of blind obedience, is to learn the art of satire, mockery. And it keeps a very light edge on where they want to conscript you, because as soon as you become serious, then you either become angry and violent or you belong to the cult of them. They've won. As soon as you're angry, they win. Next thing you know, you're obedient. And you're angry in your obedience. And that's the death of you, I was told by political prisoners. The more angry you were, the less immunity you had, and the less value you were as a freedom fighter. So to be vigilant against anger and judgment and blame. My freedom is not yours to take. Do we know what freedom means? How well do we meditate? How well do we breathe on our own? One of the greatest ways to see how free you are is to see how well you know your mind. Do you know this to be joy? Do you know this? Can you place your consciousness in self-respect? Can you place your mind in independent thinking? Can you place your mind in deep curiosity about an edge that seems believable, but you doubt it consciously? Do you know what mindfulness is versus comfort? So I would write down and study the Dhamma literacy of states of mind that are responsible for successful spiritual self-defense. And make a career out of these next weeks or months in establishing ourselves as firmly as possible in these timeless qualities of solidarity with independent thinking. The world, by and large, at the best of times, wants to conscript you into its own lie. The lie of consumerism, the lie of capitalism, the lie of the cult of belonging to the future. So many ways that we disavow ourselves from the integrity and the artistry and the poetry and the intimacy, as you know so well, of just simply being in rapport with one another, not based on your status, your size, your shape, your color, what you have, what you'll give to me, who you are, where you're going, what you've done, what you wear, who you've known, what you've written, all status, status, status. The intellectuals in Burma were stripped of status except for their conscience. Conscience, make it a virtue, a strength, a power, nurture it as much as possible. Closing. U Win Tin, amazing. They're all so amazing, some of these men and women. I was living in Paris after I was expelled from Burma in '96, being with U Win Tin and U Tin U and Aung San Suu Kyi. And I went to Paris. My publisher was in France. And there I lightly edited the book and finalized it and where it was published. And in that process of editing and publication, I was living very near to Notre-Dame.
And I would go there often because I studied in my own little way medieval cathedrals in Europe when I was in college. I just liked the ambience of that study, the art, the stained glass, the history. And as I've said many times, I have a deep affiliation with Christianity, Christ, Jesus, all the key players, in my own humble way. I think I've said I was the president of the Young Christians Association, a senior in high school, same in college. I had a deep aspiration to feel. My grandmother was deeply religious and brought a very deep mysticism, but I would go to Notre-Dame and reflect and meditate and write in a notebook. And one day I had been walking and I was molested and accosted and quite beaten up by people on the street. And I went to Notre-Dame for refuge. It wasn't that harm, but it was pretty painful. And I remember sitting in one of the pews there, reflecting on a place I'd been many times. And with my eyes closed, I overheard a tour guide speaking about the history of Notre-Dame, which I knew quite a bit about. And she was talking about how it was conceived in something like the year 10,083 or something, and it took something like 800 years to construct. And I was thinking about my walk that night was based upon Ubud having been detained and incarcerated. And it was very painful to know that my very dear friend was being tortured. And I remember hearing about that torture that was leaking out, that he was forced on his knees for 28 days with a hood over his head, with his hands behind his back. And they virtually tried to break him because he was Aung San Suu Kyi's ally, deep, close ally, former military man. And he later told me the full story, but they kept asking him, the interrogators, why are you doing what you're doing for freedom? He couldn't believe that it was actually sincere. He thought it was just a really bad joke of torture. Why are you doing what you're doing for freedom? Believing that he was a former military man, and why would you abandon the military to join Aung San Suu Kyi in the revolution? 28 days went by, and I can't even imagine the physicality, the emotionality of that, but it was fairly common for the dictatorship to do this type of thing to revolutionaries. And eventually they were screaming at him in those 28 days, bringing him back up every minute or so for falling over for tiredness. And they were screaming in his ear. He said, why are you doing what you're doing for this thing called freedom? And he only said one thing, and he said, for your sake. That my freedom could not be complete without your freedom. A very Ubuntu-like comment. That was very much a mantra of Burma's revolution. My freedom and your freedom are inseparably interconnected. I'm not doing it to bring democracy to my side, to therefore penalize and torture you. I'm doing it because it's a better way to create security for you and your family and you. My freedom and your freedom are inseparable. Well, he spent the next long time in prison. But I'm in Notre Dame thinking about U Win Taine and his torture. And I remember at that time, and they always had the long-term approach to challenge dictatorship. I remember thinking about what would it be like to have a vision to create this great cathedral called the Great Woman, the Great Mother. And I don't know about you, but you can go back there, what it would be like to actually have a vision, a true vision, not just of our own independence, but what's stirring in your own soul. And I thought, what would it be like to bring my little drawing of this great church to a group of people who I thought as allies, benefactors, supporters, people who would support this. And therein lies this incredibly old table, 800, 900 years ago, with candles on it, all dressed in this and that. And they're all coming from their little places, from the village and the castle, out of respect for me. And they're asking, what did you want from us? Why are you here? What do you have to share? And I said, I have a vision. And it's, okay, what is it? It's to build a cathedral. And you could only imagine the things. Do you have a business plan? All the hoops that need to be done to be reasonable. I said, George, nope. Just something stirred in my soul. It'll never work, Ellen. You need a business plan. Someone else says, how long will it take? And you say, probably in conservative estimates, maybe 300 or 400 years. And they go like, are you absolutely intoxicated on stupidity? Maybe there'd been a history in Europe of these long-term projects. On and on, you get the point. And I kept thinking, what is a vision that isn't confined by cathedral walls today? I was saying this earlier about we get to be revolutionaries and visionaries here in our disobedience to the powers that be, which they be beyond government, which are even believing in death, and disease, and illness, and confinement, and incarceration, and the tragedy, the word tragedy, and the suffering is real. I can never excuse blood and suffering and trauma. But there's still something that came before us that gave us what we have. They were visionaries. The earth is filled with the soldiers of decency that brought us up. Each of us reflect on our own parents, for good or bad, held us when we couldn't hold ourselves. We're guardians of the present as much as we are, I feel, guardians of the future right now. And so maybe in this little dark moment, this complex moment where there's still amazing grace, what's stirring in your soul, and you bring your candle lights around and bring your tribe and family around, and what is it that I really want to bring forth into the future, both the immediate present, how well do I want to tend to my home, to the next few months, perhaps the next year, and perhaps have a visionary quest that I want my life to be an expression of independent thinking, of revolutionary freedom, of leaving a set of videos in the most durable metallic box buried 50 feet beneath the earth that show people what it means to touch the earth and grow with the wisdom of permaculture. What's your gift to the future? What's your Notre-Dame? Those are the things. Aspiration for me is one of the best safeguards against indoctrination, because indoctrination comes with a small mind. But vision comes with a bigger one. And be wise about developing the durable qualities of deep questioning, inquiry, independent thinking, radical reasoning, all those philosophical, beautiful qualities meant to keep your mind free. Read Mandela's book again. Believing in the rightness of right. These political prisoners keep telling me that they survived the harshest tortures by knowing that they were right. They knew that so deep in their hearts. It's amazing. And that if I broke ranks in solidarity with others, it would show that there's a crack in the wall, that kind of thing. So who are your brothers and sisters in this revolution where you can maintain a question, a dialogue, a reference point, a support to help evolve in you and involve in me and each other this quest, this necessity for empowered spiritual self-defense? What are the constituents of spiritual self-defense? I sometimes look around and see the way people walk and talk and dress and think and speak to be walking, talking automatons and mannequins mouthing propaganda for another person's wallet. I used to joke, you get 100 Buddhist meditation teachers in the room and have them tell me how you teach meditation for 1 minute, and I could tell you who their teacher was. It was just so clear that it was conscripted. And a lot of people in this world, I find, are conscripted into the cult of belonging more than the liberty of the principles and the words that they speak and teach. You've heard the story of Yoga Monkey? No? I dare say it here in Ubud. In brief form, I could go on for an hour with it, but only be 5 minutes. I don't know where I saw it, but it was a documentary somewhere, where there was this zoo somewhere in the world with a zookeeper and a very talented monkey. And the monkey was brought out, and the zookeeper was brought in, the monkey trainer was there, and on the monkey chair, there was the monkey and his trainer with a group of photographers who were now photographing the monkey and his trainer, of doing, of all things, trained yoga asanas. You can imagine how nimble an acro yoga guy is compared to a monkey. This monkey was adept at asana. And so he would do these various asanas, and the photographers were just awed by this monkey's skill to do yoga on this chair. And I can't imagine who was photographing the monkey, but it had to do with probably Yoga Journal and all kinds of other places. I don't know exactly. I'm just kind of stretching the truth here. And the yoga monkey is obviously in a cage, trained to do what it's doing. And the people photographing the monkey are all in the zoo, outside the cage, in awe of the monkey inside his incarceration, trained probably based upon food and reward to do asana. And this concentric servitude, the concept of concentric servitude, how we are conscripted, we don't want dictatorship, but I'd much prefer to be in servitude to spiritual ideology. I'm going to do yoga at, wherever. And I'm going to do it really well. What makes that so free for you? Some of the most dogmatic people are yoga teachers, meditation teachers, breathwork coaches, ayahuasca shamans. It's eked out all over the world, the darkness of these traditions. It's no longer a mystery. The echelon of the traditions have now shown the shadow of what they didn't know that they thought they had trained through. So it's clearly a high degree of propaganda and indoctrination, even within the most liberating spiritual disciplines. And how does that differ then from religion and dogma and orthodoxy? So this comes back to the role of the spiritual intellectual, which is anathema to the spiritual tradition. You're not supposed to think, you're just conceptual, you're just in your head. Propaganda. Think for yourself, don't follow me, Monty Python. The Life of Brian, everyone should watch that movie tonight, this week, a couple of times. And so it's a very poignant reference to looking at how no one questioned in this particular film what was really happening. It was all to sell ad space and to conscript the enthusiasm for the next training. And there's something very disgusting about the story. I would sometimes look in a monastery and see 3,000 people sitting all in the same posture. All of them seeking freedom. Very much like the way soldiers march, monks and nuns sit. That is so spiritually incorrect to even allude to that. So, are you willing to be reviled, sent out as whore outcast, to be spoken about in a way that vilifies behind your back? The protection of dogma is so sacred for people. Don't step on my tradition. Okay, so I'm right with you. Harriet Tubman, you know Harriet Tubman, the great underground conductress in America, the Black American woman, most celebrated among people who challenged the white incarceration of blacks in the 1800s. I mean, you read her story, it's over the top, how she led so many of her brothers and sisters from the plantations of servitude and the white supremacist gulags of my country, against all odds, to go to Canada to taste for the first time what it meant to be human without shackles and whips. And she would have to carry a gun to challenge people's indoctrination and fear, not to turn around and go back to servitude rather than to keep walking. That's how addicted we are to the structures of security over freedom. I can imagine. And it said that before she died, she was asked, "Do you have, Harriet, any regrets?" And actually, I read this and heard this from the lead guitarist of a group that I'm quite fond of called Rage Against the Machine. And it said that she replied, "I wish I could have led 1,000 more of my black brothers and sisters to freedom. But there I was, and they didn't know they were slaves." Now, what? Every day for 6 years, I thought of this moment, Uparle said. We've got an example. Mandela, there wasn't a day in 25 years I didn't think of my freedom and the freedom of my people. Will you take up a gun with me if needed? Will you stand in solidarity, hand in hand, and take a bullet rather than be incarcerated in a lie? Will you just simply keep developing in your own elegant way your own attributes of spiritual self-defense and share them in our community, so that we learn here in our toolbox of skills ways to fortify our psyches, our integrity, our conscience, to be more steadfast? So I can see in you, which is very interesting to see. I really like to see this in you, not because of you, but this is the stirring, for me, I say this respect to you, the stirring of greatness. That you have that aspiration means that you are willing to stand up. It may not be to the man or the woman we see right now, but you're willing to stand up. You want to own your mind and be true to yourself. Is that true? Yeah? I mean, I could get into my Tony Robbins in a second, or my revolutionary, and go, say it out loud. You know, that's what they did in Burma. Stand up and say it, declare it. Let yourself hear your wisdom, your revolution. Stand up and cry and quiver. Watch the expectation to be strong. But learn to quiver, they said. Learn to quiver, learn to quiver. So that kind of thing, you know. Be impassioned, be out of the box. And safeguard your freedom, the freedom of your friends, you know, more than anything. And I'll close with this, you know. I'm no Harriet Tubman, I'm no Uparle, no Gandhi, any of that stuff, but If I were to have shackles on my hand and on my legs, or if I'm that yoga monkey there doing those kind of asanas, in joy and bliss and dopamine, meanwhile I'm just doing the antics of someone else's need, how do you basically quit and say, I'm done? First for me is to recognize what are my shackles, what are my constraints, and often they're pleasurable. I don't want to get sick. Woo woo. You and everyone else on the planet, animals, roaches too. How interesting, how unique, how cool. Let's make a dedication out of that. I don't want to get sick. Let's just dedicate my life to being, eating garlic and turmeric forever. Do enemas with the shit. That's my vocation as a revolutionary. Keeping my immune system strong so that I can feed myself again. Really, you and Gandhi. You gotta joke at how trite you are. At the same time, see the relativity of something, right? Because she's saying, I wish I had the ability to talk to my black brothers and sisters that you're a slave. There is freedom. There's freedom. There is freedom beyond what you think you need to do for yourself right now. So how to acquaint ourselves with discomfort that seems to be security. Okay, that's one. You've got to identify the chains. And they're often felt as joys, what you do well. My home, my house, my health, my looks, my food, my support, my books, my next vision. But what really, really matters here? My mortgage or my independence? I could let go of it. No, I don't need the chain of my mortgage. No, I don't need it. I've never felt more liberated since I was like about 30. The last 2 years, living not out of a suitcase, but living in choice. Living in choice. So part of this is treasuring freedom, living in choice, and knowing the shackles that bind us, and knowing their feeling, and knowing how to remove them, and having the bravery, the courage, and integrity, and compassion to change those behaviors. The White House in America, built by black people. I read a book by Derek Jensen. I recommend that you might read it. A Language Older Than Words. Poet laureate. He was serially violated as a man by his father, sexually. This is a memoir and a historical book on violence in America, coupled with his own story of successive, all the time systemic sexual violence from a very prominent lawyer. And among many fascinating lines, and he's talented with line by line, meticulous detail, he talked about how he did some research about the name of a particular college dormitory at the University of Colorado in Denver, or maybe Boulder, that was named after a particular American soldier at the time in the 1800s. And so he did research on the name and found in an old archival copy of the Denver Post, this man being referenced on the cover as having been the leader of an assault on the local Indian population that had agreed to a treaty months before, and they came in with gifts and ambushed them and killed them all. And he was celebrated back home in Denver. His name was inscribed on the dormitory, and no one knew really the association. But more distinctly, which is unthinkably grotesque, and very few people know this, many people think of how scalping was an Indian thing, but it turned out to be an American soldier thing. And it wasn't just scalping heads. What this picture on the front page of the Denver Post 150 years ago shows is they cut the genitals off of the women. And they would wear them on their helmets and on the horses' heads as victory signs over the savages. Think of, we use the word toxic patriarchy, unquestioned propaganda. America, the land of the free. Look deeper and deeper and you go, what a history of persecution, violence, and propaganda, indoctrination. How have I been conscripted into this belief system? I had the good sense young, we're from the same country as Josh is, as Chris is, to question authority. And that's the last thing I'll share is, I had a teacher for the first time in my life, a Sayadaw U Pandita, who was Aung San Suu Kyi's teacher. She defined her revolution by the art of the question. And he was all over, learn to question everything. I'd never heard that from anyone. They wanted you to agree, to be in harmony, to listen, to be inspired, to write it down, to memorize it, to act it out. And dialogue was his virtue. Let's talk about it. He would ask you questions to kind of instigate the revolution of dialogue. And I never met someone so prominent like this, who would ask questions to me and profoundly encourage this art of questioning. And it stayed in me. And Burma's revolution was born from that art form. Asking the question, one of the best forms of spiritual self-defense. Is this true? How do I know it's true? And let me cross-reference it by several different deep researches, like Derek did with the dormitory. And it was changed as a result of his understanding, his research. It was taken down. But this is where I go. The propaganda of religion, for me, speaks about a dynamic here, both in this world and beyond and before, that doesn't agree with my sensibilities. Am I an atheist? I'm kind of a trans-atheist. But I'm a free thinker that really is free associated with a kind of hyper-trans existentialism that has beliefs, but much more into the organic quantum flow of like being willing to move through time and space. One of my best friends is one of the world's authorities on UFOs, on her best-selling book in the New York Times on surviving death. Where's consciousness after death? Those things really give me a lot of hope that who we are, where we are, isn't all there is. So my last thing for spiritual self-defense is awe and wonderment and not easily satisfied with the jewels and the riches and the struggles of day-to-day kind of thing. So, and I'll be your ally. You find that you've got a doctrine that I should know, let me know. I'll be happy to dialogue and question with you. But I think it's a beautiful question and aspiration that you have, and it's an inspiration to me. And for those of you who are online watching or listening, may you too be vigilant in safeguarding consciousness from indoctrination and propaganda, and maintain independent thinking, and not to give away our freedom and dignity unless that's your choice. So other things that you want to talk about, take a moment, think about it. Anything at all? It's our final day today together.
So when you
Sure.
mentioned earlier feeling anti-religion, something to that effect, I thought, well, yeah, there's religion, there's government, which is now really politics, there's industry, institutions. There's very little left when we really look at artificial intelligence potentially, when we really look at the influences that be. I think it goes far beyond religion and journalism, newspapers. So we get very shrunk and small in the light of the world propaganda. What do you have to say about that?
Successive levels of propaganda, successive levels of incarceration. Then there's the concept of self-servitude, how we enslave ourselves. I have seen no greater freedom fighter than the power of vipassana meditation, insight meditation. There's nothing that I've seen more powerful to maintain independent thinking and autonomy and sovereignty to higher states of consciousness. Because it, Terry, it puts you face to face intimately with ideation and the meaning of ideation on the felt level of its truth. You get to hear and feel the efficacy of the definition that you bring to the word. It couldn't get you closer to reading the cellular level of a concept. Democracy, what does it mean? Well, feel into it right here and now. Is it an idea, or how do you feel democracy in your blood right now? By the freedom of thought to let it come and go. And the compassion to have that thought be something someone else might have and be completely different than yours, but out of respect to freedom, you can coexist with diversity. How do you manifest diversity? To live in a changing, unique, diverse interior world, and you really take it in and feel that it's your blood. I've never seen anything more radical, more elegant, more, just again, intelligent than the power of insight meditation. If there's anything that I would ever hope my daughter, who may be listening, Bella, would ever do, would be to find a guide, an elegant teacher, and give classical insight meditation an experiential opportunity and see what it feels like to her own life and mind. I know, just a few more words about this, I never really wanted to become a monk. All I wanted to do was to practice vipassana insight meditation. And the entry requirements were becoming a monk to therefore validate my sincerity to the dictatorship to allow me to get a visa, potentially, where there had been no visas granted to anyone other than diplomats for many years. So I ordained. And, Terry, when I left New York, where I ordained, and went to London on the flight with my teachers in Mahasi Sayadaw, I remember living in a monastery temporarily in Wimbledon and waking up very early for the first time looking in a mirror. And I was just shocked not to have hair and wearing these orange curtains. And my point is, I had so much affinity to my hair. And my clothing, and my coffee, and my cocaine, and my Marlboro Lights, and my sex, and my masturbation, and my books, and my education, and my paintings, and my art, and my travel, and my car, and my pet, and my lover. And I just had this cacophony of, Alan, you've made a choice to leave that behind. And I felt tragically naked as I quivered in the emergence of a new freedom from forms. Point one, Vipassana in action makes you feel up close to forms of social, cultural, political, acceptable, I don't say incarceration, but many people wake up after a decade or three and go, I've been a whore for the corporate life. Okay? I went to Burma, was given a room, and was told the instructions. And after 3 weeks of horror, of coming up close to the best kept secret of my life, which was me, I'd always had the convenience of choice. But here I was simply given a free room, no cost, shave your head, wear the robes, practice the meditation, and I was imprisoned because I couldn't make choices on my terms of when I wanted to do them. And I looked at every possible angle of blame and judgment, primarily external, until eventually I knew that I'd made a mistake in doing this, but I bought a one-way ticket. It'd be ultimately humiliating to go back to America, to a culture that Krishnamurti talked about, which I believed. What measure of success is it to be profoundly adjusted to a sick society? I left a sick society. There was no returning to the picket fence. Money couldn't liberate me. I already had enough. And here I was, naked in this monastery without English, practicing this timeless teaching of looking at your mind unfold in the present moment. And I was horrified at the servitude, the slavery of me being involved in forms. I'm not saying it's wrong, but it was like, wow, what a confrontation to the best kept secret of all, my own naked self. I couldn't sit still. I couldn't just simply watch the most organic expression of being human, my breath. And remember hearing these dogs bark one night right outside of my window, and I went out there with a flashlight wanting to chase the dogs away. And there was a mother dog with 5 or 6 puppies breastfeeding, and the puppies didn't even have their eyes open, and they were squealing and kind of growling and hustling and bustling for the nipple. And I immediately saw my own life in that process, how incessantly connected I was to this primordial choice called satisfy me on my terms when I want it, mother, the primordial nipple. In the absence of that, their eyes closed. They didn't even know what they were sucking. It was instinctual. And here I am with my eyes open, and I'm feeling like I can't get what I want when I want it. The next line. I'm not trying to exaggerate to bring anything denigrating to normal life, but life's been interrupted. So I went back to my room and took ownership that these forces of fear and anger were very elegant to see on the terms of naked presence. I began to see the value of conscious renunciation. I felt gifted that I was in this monastery in a timeless vehicle towards liberation, and they were supporting me, a perfect stranger, in seeing my own mind on the terms of its own naturalness, seeing my own mind on the terms of its own naturalness, dying into living in a way. So I practiced diligently, and I felt over the course of the next week or month that I was riding in this golden chariot into this sunlight of freedom. I'd never felt so gifted to be among people who celebrated my intensity, who needed nothing from me, asked nothing of me, other than to be mindful of my own mind. And a joy arose over time that I never knew, that wasn't connected to the coffee or the New York Times or to sex or to the hustle, the pattern. I'm not judging it, but it wasn't very freeing. It was like that Harriet Tubman. No, I want to be here. I don't want to be a yogi. I don't want to be in the monastery. I don't want to be in Vipassana meditation. I don't want to be awake in the world and liberating myself from the structures. I want it all. I want it all. I want it all. But right now we're being told that you can't have it the way you want it. But there's the anticipation that we could have it again. So we're holding ourselves out. but don't hold yourself hostage.
Well, something you alluded to earlier was that you had a lot of opinions about, I mean, maybe it's UFOs or maybe it's spirits that we can't verify, or maybe you can, I don't know. But I would like you to talk a little bit more about that, because on some level, that holds some out. On some level, that holds some alternative to the powers that be. And, I just want to comment before I say that that was a very rapid transformation you just described.
Yes.
Your own experience. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And very quick in it to be so rapid.
Well, it was a radical, longer-term transformation in that. There were a lot of years before that that were discernible incarnations, not unlike a lot of people. We went through the music revolution, the psychedelic revolution, the intimacy revolution, the love one, the philosophical one, the quitting college one, the making our own independent wealth one, looking at each other's eyes and going like, is this the end of it all? Let's go to India and ask the questions. Ginsburg was there. Let's do Kerouac. Getting to India and everyone's like, what's the big deal here? Like, all that I got out of India was like, don't want it. I've been doing yoga since I was 17. I'd rather do it in a clean place. And all I could see being in Calcutta was, oh my God, that could be me. That was a deep insight. But I said, listen, there's only one thing you can do here. Make haste to know your own mind. You can't rearrange the furniture sufficiently enough to satisfy the removal of fear. It only comes from within, that whole kind of perennial Eastern cliche. But it seems to be, when you ask me, the greatest liberator and the greatest form of spiritual self-defense is this Vipassana meditation. But back to your comment about the acronym, the UFO, unidentified flying object. First of all, read my friend Leslie Kane's books. I mean, she and I are super close friends. We were in Burma together with Aung San Suu Kyi. She's an amazing, talented, investigative journalist, one of the best in the world. And she wrote these books, UFO, testimonies of generals, pilots, and political officials. It's not her. It's like she let the leading minds in the world, who are the most authoritative and trusted, give their expressions in the book about their encounters with an unidentified flying object. It's not like validating that these things are flying machines with people behind wheels or the more conventional projection of aliens. It's just an investigative journalist's account by the most authoritative people in the world who've had encounters that it validates to 2 to 3% of things that can't be defined by, we don't know what it is. And so the criteria for all these unidentified objects are multiple sightings at the same time, had to have been on radar, and sometimes physical evidence. So it wasn't just like someone's in the middle of West Virginia looking up at the night and there's a star going by and they mistake it for an alien. These are, the head of the Russian Defense Forces. President Carter, governor of Arizona. I mean, it's like, and you go like, whoa. The New York Times recently did a cover story of her work, which took the politics to become a cover story on the New York Times. So the cat's out of the bag with that issue. And physics and physicists can explain some of the hard questions, but she explains it brilliantly in her book. How can things physically even move through time and space at such distances, and the curvatures of the world and the universe? And so there's ways to even physics and physicists explain these types of things. They seem to exist, and even obviously today, there are thousands and multiple thousands of planets that exhibit the kind of life frequency and forms similar to Earth. We're in an inhabited universe. To me, that gives me it's compelling. I know my experimentation with certain molecules have brought me face to face with deities and entities. I've also researched very carefully with a few allies in those researches, where an individual will be talking very distinctly to someone. I've seen them, I feel them. In Burma, Buddhism is intimately integral with deities and dimensionality. People have reduced and taken out of that to sell a more sterile, non-so-called religious expression of meditation. But Buddhism itself is integral to deities and dimensionalities. Most of the Buddha's teachings are to other beings other than humans. All the texts refer to those. So that's a whole other topic. I've written a book about it, actually. I've never published it. On dimensions of existence and that kind of thing. I'm really fascinated by it. Really, really fascinated by heightened perception as well. Like the ability to hear things far beyond your normal capacity. Obviously, the cliche is dolphins can hear a very long way, and so on and so forth. So too with extrasensory perception. As a young boy, I did, my 7th grade term paper on yoga. I recently found it when my parents died in the attic. And then when I was 13, growing up very near to one of the world's foremost clairvoyants, Edgar Cayce, I lived about 2 miles from his center in the world, the Center for Research and Enlightenment, where I did a 3-month paper on clairvoyance based upon 10,000 case studies of his, where he'd go into a self-induced trance and his handlers would talk about circumstances in California from Virginia Beach. They'd be on the phone, and he would be saying in this trance to do this and do that, and they would bring things together and mix it and be these spontaneous healings. So this is documented evidence of that kind of, and people from all over the world, telepathists and clairvoyants, came to Virginia Beach. It was like the milieu there. And then of course you throw in the molecules that we all did in the late 60s, early 70s, and you mix that with transcendental thought and Eastern projected philosophical experience and deities and clairvoyance, and all of a sudden you get who we are today. But I find that multidimensional world a very freeing one to reflect upon. Even in Burma recently, I'll end with this, I brought it up so repeatedly with monks that I have made what's called an aditant, a type of meditation, a determination where one can gather over days, weeks, and months, and possibly years, a directed intentionality to, it's like the wake of a ship, but the front of a channeling of your consciousness to move forward into dimensions of your choice, rather than out of convenience or habit or circumstance. I call it aditant in meditative circles in Buddhism, where I have specific circumstances that I want to be in. And I'm very fond of those circumstances, and I've been more and more repeatedly making these aditants. May my day, my virtues, my ethical, moral, spiritual decisions and behaviors support the purity, the depth of my aspiration to achieve my aditant, to be born, reborn, in the circumstances of the coming Buddha, Maitreya, in a particular dimension of the Deva worlds, to Sita, and I want to be in the company of this Buddha to be with the key allies that have dedicated eons of life and time and development, these paramis, to be in this Buddha's Sangha, like Gautama's Buddha. There was 24 or 25 previous Buddhas, Gautama was the 23rd or 4th, and then we've got Maitreya, the last in this cycle. I want to see what it means to listen and be in the company of a Buddha. I don't care to want to be a Buddha. I want to just simply see how they go about the business of communicating, living, and bringing together in this crazy samsara a rare harmonic. And second to that, thank you for listening, I want to be adept in the agility of consciousness to do anything that's possible with consciousness. If you look at like the Dalai Lama, for example, he is the 13th incarnation of the Dalai Lama, right? And when you look at his historical record and how it came to be, there were primarily men early on in his life that did a kind of test in his familiarity with objects and things to determine, oh, this is the previous Dalai Lama incarnating in this life. And it wasn't as if they made a mistake. It wasn't Jimmy Carter. It was the Dalai Lama, the 12th Dalai Lama. But when you look at Tibetan Buddhism and you look at the Dalai Lama's teaching, just the issue of that level of validation of incarnation largely goes completely unexpressed in society. It's a fait accompli. But when you really brought her or him into the room, and I asked this woman, I don't know her, and I said, Jenny, what is your name? She said, I'm Jenny the 13th. It'd be like, are you from Canggu or Ubud? What training did you do? No, you don't realize I'm the high priestess of Lemuria, the 13th. It sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? The Dalai Lama, the most celebrated individual, more than the Pope today, in intellectual circles, and largely goes unchallenged that this dude knew and knows and believes I was the 12th, the 11th, the 10th, the 9th, the 8th, 13 incarnations. I find that really amazing, that really smart people, you know, presidents and Richard Gere and everyone, you know, he's the incarnation. So it's not like far-fetched to talk about these things. And I would love to know if Ian had the capacity. Alan, would you like to know a previous life of yours? You're like Alan the 4,000th in incarnation. Well, the Buddha did this. And often in these discourses and texts, talk to people about who they were together in previous lifetimes. If you want some validation, read the Jataka Tales, 2 or 3 volumes, and it's amazing to talk about who they were in previous lifetimes and what they did. But anyway, it's pointing to something so obvious it's largely overlooked, and when I say these things, they're seen as kind of airy-fairy and possible magical thinking, but by and large, I think that there's much more reason to believe in these things, like Einstein said. Do you believe in rebirth? He said, well, the greatest evidence for rebirth is birth itself. And I kind of stand in that camp, that you prove to me that it isn't true, and I'll just keep believing in the possibility of living into these dimensions. And I would love to have the ability. I put out for 25 years with the Dalai Lama. I'd like to have a conversation with him. How do you learn to duplicate your body? Okay, if you knew you're the 13th, sir, don't you think that you could come up with a cure for cancer? Don't you think that you can go right into your soul and all of your Tibetan handlers and go, coronavirus is gone? If you can say that your new religion, they fly through the air like they do in Tibetan Buddhism, help the people on the front lines of developing a vaccine to infuse it with some psychic Tibetan power. What's the medicine? I mean, those aren't unreasonable considerations. So I want to see if it's humanly possible to do anything consciousness wants, anytime it wants, especially the power of Vipassana meditation. I want to know, without a doubt, that my mind, this mind, is absolutely free of the conditions of being provoked into fear, greed, and anger. That to me is the greatest miracle of all. That someone put forth an ideal, the absolute absence of fear, is very compelling to me. This is what I say about Vipassana being the greatest way to develop freedom and sovereignty in the midst of this maddening samsaric propaganda. So, thank you for bringing all that up. Read Leslie's book, Leslie Kean, Kean, UFOs, and it's got a great subtitle of all those authorities, and Surviving Death, both New York Times bestsellers.
Well, thank you for your response. I thought it was very vulnerable, and I couldn't help but think, well, maybe by putting this out, you'll publicly, by broadcasting it, you'll bring yourself closer to having it manifest. I hope
Terry,
that.
may it be so. Thank you for your compassion and your dedication. I do hope so. And that's it's not necessarily vulnerable, but it's really joyous to hear it. And I'm all over it. All over it. So, I don't know what time it is, but 4:15. So is there anything, before we take a little break, is there anything that you want to do, want to say, want to see happen for these final 45 minutes rather than my agenda? Please take a few seconds and minutes there to reflect. How could we individually, how could we together, including the people around the world, bring something appropriate, skillful, unique, compelling to these final minutes that would be of value to each of us individually or collectively? Please.
I guess tying in with the idea of calling off the future, and for me, I think of more in terms of uncertainty and facing uncertainty, accepting uncertainty, even embracing uncertainty. Because for calling off the future, maybe I perceive that as more just being present and just it is accepting what is. Whereas with uncertainty, I feel like there's more, maybe less passive sort of, you face it, you sort of digest it, you accept, you come to terms with it. So I don't know. To me, uncertainty seems to be the underlying issue that comes back for everyone. You just don't know.
Well, I hear you. That's very, being a dad to my daughter, taking something very personal. The most operative word there is her well-being. What secures her best interest? What's in the best interest of my daughter, Bella? Now, so the way I would go about answering this question about uncertainty, where do you feel most compelled to belong to someone else's well-being? And if there are one or two people, three people, then I would personally, if it were me, seek ways to develop the most secure way to manifest that well-being on the terms of physical reality and your own personal health. Make good on the promise of that expression of generosity and compassion and love by taking care of yourself as much as possible, and equally looking at the framework to secure your passage should it not be on this island. Pragmatism. That's one. So one, who are the people that are your stars, your soul stars? If in fact you feel when you're in a resonant place with your own heart, the most intimate, quiet reflection, how much do they really matter? And how much does my presence in their company really matter? And why? Okay. And I'm asking the same questions to myself pretty much now every day in regard to my daughter. What's in her best interest? And secondly, in that process, because I am here now, to keep manifesting aspects of that well-being without the final outcome to be so-called thinking I need to be in her own home or in her city or holding her hand or going to the movies or talking or, you know, how can I do it now? What can I do now to fulfill that? So that kind of offsets the uncertainty by focusing on what is really compelling, which gives me natural courage. Thinking of others, I always come back to what Aung San Suu Kyi said, our revolution will be successful based upon an individual's willingness to have the courage to care for things larger than our own self-interest. That's what got revolutionaries through the darkest times. What does your courage tell you to care about? And then it quiets the uncertainty. Doesn't dissipate it completely, but it quiets it. That's one. You with me? Then if primarily you are the entity, you're the goddess, you're the priestess, you're the being that's most important, not to say that these other individuals in the constellation of your love don't matter. They shine independent of you being there. And you talk to them on FaceTime and whatever, and they're down with you being here and you're there, and okay, now I am who I am, facing uncertainty. I would go right back into what is the best ways that you have found to address and quiet anxiety through emotional, psychological, existential, and physical, and dietary means. I don't like not exercising every day. I feel anxious. I don't like not doing some form of disciplined yoga every day. I feel tighter. I don't not like being more meditative. I feel more anxious. I don't like not using my voice to communicate more intimate things to me, and I write them down. What are the beautiful things that you do for yourself in a day? Do them well and do them more. That's, emotional, spiritual, mindful intelligence in action. Developing resilience, patience. What are the constituents of resilience for you? Dhamma literacy, meditative literacy. Take them out of speculation. Learn to do the Elie Wiesel thing. Question and seek your own answers into new openings of deeper questions. You with me? So outer and inner. And the last area where I go is, okay, I'm going to face my uncertainty. What are those uncertain things that I want to face? And make a note of them on some form of cellular, soul level parchment paper, and just take them out of the darkness of denial and ambiguity and unexamined thought. I fear uncertainty itself. Uncertainty is its own uncertainty. There is no really projection of that, or is there? So I'd ask you, if we were in retreat together and it had a longer time, please come back. Please come back with your list of discernible complexities that you found that really validate the concern that you have. Not having food, not being where I want, not having enough money, not having a visa when I need it, what's the cost of the visa, all the ambiguities and uncertainties of my well-being, my safety, my sovereignty, my freedom here. And put them out. And then the last area would be to know that you can't live without others, and that you are a beautiful mind that's deserving of support. And whatever you feel that you need and don't have, don't hesitate to know that there are people in this world who care enough about caring and care enough about you to support you in your time of need. So not to be in a self-abandonment phase through fear of asking and requests. And like it came up for me today, for example, I'll just bring it back to me. You know, I've just spent 2 years doing a documentary film. It's so funny. And it's finished about a week before the virus took off. And it's just useless. Theaters, film festivals, they're tanked, and they may lay down for, who knows, months and years. Done. I had co-joined with them, speaking tour, workshops, revenue from ticket sales. I had an income. It was giving me an income to do these groups as a gift. Gone. It's been 8 years working on 4-volume set of books. They weren't going to be a bestseller, but they are very proud of them. I don't have, it doesn't feel like the right time to publish them, even to self-publish them. And so what I do have at this point is, what do I want to do as a next level of offering? Even groups like this, probably next week on Bali, may be something where it's unacceptable to do. I mean, the word lockdown now has gone viral by the minute. And all of a sudden, I'm like in my small little hotel room, reading the news and doing nothing but spending down what little's left and listening to my own mind, where I can't even go out, where I'm eating at home now. And the reason I came to Bali was to meet people and to do what I do publicly. And it's like, no, May, June, July, August, September. What? You mean this is where I am? That really kind of puts a chill in my, that kind of thing. Makes me a little bit scared. So anyway, I met, through choice, a very talented filmmaker. And we sat and talked, and he's agreed, because we really see eye to eye on an online, not a course, but an online sharing. And he's really good. And we're going to meet again soon, but he's agreed to create a sequence of films and edit them for an online offering that's similar to this, but I want to put out exactly what I think and feel and offer it as a gift. The only problem is that to film is $5,000 and to edit is $5,000. Excuse me. To film is about $2,000, to edit $3,000, and the website's about $2,000 to $4,000 or $5,000. Okay, so it's a $10,000 US vision, which I don't have. So I'm thinking, who could I ask? I have to tell you, Chris, it's like I go into like, Alan, you pride yourself on not having to ask. Don't ask. Who can you ask? And so I made a note to myself in this nap. I've got a longtime ally in Los Angeles. I'm going to ask. I decided I'm going to just, for the first time in my life, I'm going to ask. But it makes me nervous. But I'm going to write it in such a way that it's not really an ask, but it's an invitation. And I, for the first time in a long, long time, I said, I feel really good about this because I really want to do this. I feel like I have something to say. I want to share it. This person's really talented. And there couldn't be a greater need right now for that to happen. Even my friend Scott at USADA, who owns USADA, we've agreed to do every day for the next 30 days a specific topic about facing the global crisis, broadcast. all over it. And it's like, okay, that gives me a reason to be here. It stabilizes, that kind of thing. So anyway, I just wanted to share, you're not alone. If you've got a spare 10, I'll tell you what account, you can just pay him directly. He's really a very rare good filmmaker that really gets subtlety. And it's not easy to talk to a camera, but he's the first person I've met in a long time that kind of gets the ambiance required to be in that level of intimacy. Anyway, so I am vulnerable in sharing that with you, but what are your needs is what I'm pointing to here. What are the things that would quiet your worry? Let me just say one more thing here. Last year in my family, broader family, there was a murder. And it rippled a trauma through our family after the death of many of our parents. And this last September, my brother, who is one of the more able people in the broader family, had a very big family, to bring everyone together. We went to my parents' house in Virginia, where his son and his wife now live. And as many of the family that could make it around the world came. And over the course of the 3 days, we did all the things that family and strangers do, talk and drink and hang. But midway through, my brother asked everyone to come into the living room, and he proceeded to invite everyone to share who they are, what matters, where are you, and give each other total attention to each other. And it could have gone really astray. But very quickly, from the oldest to the youngest, they spoke. It created a vortex of intimacy and transformation that I had never experienced before. My mom and dad were in that room. I knew my mom and dad primarily in that living room. And every one of these people were family, old, intimate, deeply embedded cousins and family, wives and children. Even my daughter was beamed in on FaceTime, so she was there. But more to the point, when it came time for my first cousin to speak, the mother of my cousin who committed the murder, who killed his wife and killed his daughter, everyone really went quiet. Then his sister talked. What a process of listening to someone. How come I didn't see this? I didn't know it coming. All that kind of dialogue. I could go on about this, but was there a gift in this that I got, that they got? How come we did not ask the question to those whom we love the most, how are you? How are you really? How do you, I want to really be, I'm with you. If you could see the unthinkable tears of these people talking. And that was a very huge teaching for me, how easy it is not to be there for those whom you love, and to really think that you are. And I just said, don't be satisfied with the simple question. Be very skillful. Take a walk and hang and really get to know more of the hidden recesses, so that the next thing you know, where is John? Where is Mary? How many times around the world I've heard stories. How could it have happened? Why did they kill themselves? How many suicides can be prevented through simply an act of intimate, I want to know you, how are you, I'm here with you, I want to know the secret thing. So you're bringing up primarily something for me. It's very hard for me to share how I feel. You can easily think you know how I feel, but it's very hard to know how I really feel. And I have a couple of people in my life who are amazing. I'm blessed to have several really talented, long-term clinical psychologists in my life as best friends, and a couple of really long-term friends, 30 years, 48 years. But still, Chris, I go to bed at night, I don't know about you, and there's still a secret soul. I still have that little place inside that says, I just wish someone cared enough to alleviate the stress of what I feel. That's a little bit of the final little thing. Please, can you just satiate? And then I go come back into your sovereignty, do your art, be willing to do anything at all, to just keep using your voice and to be authentic and be real and just trust in the fate and the magic of the universe and pray that we're there for each other. You know the story of Frankl? Over the top. He's a Polish Jew taken to Auschwitz on a train. Freezing, naked, squeezed in, and he's next to a man who's an older man in the village, whom he knew only by passing. And here it was in this frigid night, chugging along, naked, to a death camp. And his instinct, as he felt the man in front of him squeezed in, shaking as he tells the story, to put his hand on the man's body, to warm him. And he talks about rubbing the man's head, his neck, his arms, his legs, and just staying connected to contact on the man's body to warm him throughout the night. And as he tells the story, as I remember reading it, in the morning, at the break of sunlight through the open airs and the cracks in the wood, it revealed when he looked around in the boxcart that everyone was frozen to death, except he and the old man. It's beyond epic to think of that kind of circumstance, but we're among our own kind here where that is real. And I can't believe a more epic expression of Ubuntu. And I invite you to invite me, to invite the people in our community. May we rise to the occasion should it be called on, to care for each other in ways that are unordinary, extraordinary. And who knows, come what may, we keep alive the timeless qualities, I believe, integrity, conscience, compassion, generosity. And these existential memes will play across eternity. I do believe that nothing's lost like this. And if nothing else, it's believing, as Mandela said, when asked, do you believe in the goodness of woman and man? He said, I do believe in that, but you must know how to bring it out. And so that proactive quality of how can we commune and bring the best of each other out while we do have the chance to interrelate is a very beautiful thing. So may we conclude this time together, if I may, with our own quiet aspiration, should you wish to make it, those of you who are watching online, who will watch it into the future. May we share whatever collective moral, spiritual goodness that's evolved collectively here for these 3 days. May we share these qualities in this timeless world with all beings for the benefit of their safety, their security, their happiness. May we aspire to evolve the finest qualities of the human heart, whatever they may be for you. May we not leave the retreat on the sofa of this room, in this villa, in this village, in this town, on this island, but take these principles, this principle of Dhamma, and make good on the promise of standing tall in liberty and freedom, and be vigilant with our mindfulness as frequently as we can as we speak and listen, and do the best by each other, and cultivate the most simple, within our means, qualities of generosity, of kindness, of listening, and of keeping alive the revolution of caring. No matter what happens, may we stand and know that we have refuge in our own conscience and ethics, having done what was right when we were called to do it. A mind free of fear, free of worry, free of remorse, free of regret. I would like to live and die without regret. Nothing else, live without regret. And so, thank you for letting me be here with you. Terry and Ian, thank you for opening your home to me and all of us. Thank you for the people of this island to support our food and shelter and kindness. And may all the conflict and struggles that we see in the world today, may they come and pass quickly. So, thank you from my heart.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That has been Alan Clements Uncensored. Thank you for listening. You can find the entire list of my podcasts at alanclements.com, along with my books and upcoming events and live broadcasts. In addition, you can also book a private session with me if you wish by phone or Skype on the website. If you're a regular listener or simply feel moved to support my work, you can make a one-time donation or a recurring donation, a tax-deductible one, in any amount you feel comfortable, either on the support page of alanclements.com or a monthly pledge through my Patreon site at patreon.com/AlanClements. Thank you for listening to my podcast, and thank you for sharing word of it among your friends and on social media. Thank you from my heart. Until the next time, blaze on with fearless love.